Colleagues, welcome back. We move on now to the next item in session 17, which is the ISC strategy in the intergovernmental system. So by way of introducing the session, let me take you back to the 2019 to 2021 action plan, current action plan, and the ambition set out in that plan for the ISC to become recognized as, and I'll quote, the global go-to for independent, integrated scientific expertise, input, and advice, unquote. And secondly, the proposal to appoint a distinguished group of experts to advise the ISC on the development of its strategy with respect to the intergovernmental system. So Julia Martin-Lefebvre was appointed as chair of the steering group in March of this year. And in a moment, Julia will introduce the group's preliminary report. Let me say that the report was made available online on the 24th of September to members, and further comments from members are invited through an online form right through to the end of October. But let me turn to introducing Julia to you. So Julia Martin-Lefebvre was Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, also Rector of the UN-affiliated University for Peace, and she also served as Executive Director of ICSU, one of our predecessor organizations, for nearly 20 years. Julia currently serves on the boards of various NGOs, foundations, universities and corporations, and she also chairs the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement Committee. She was elected as a member of IPBES, that is the Bureau of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and certainly celebrated the bringing together of natural and social sciences into one single organization. So, Julia, I'd like to hand over to you now, please, if you would present the steering group's report. And let me indicate that after Julia's presentation, we will have time for questions and comments from members. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Good afternoon from Paris. I was pleased to accept the invitation from the CEO of the ISC in March of this year to chair a steering group on providing advice to the ISC on its strategy to work even more closely with the intergovernmental system, including, of course, the United Nations, but also organizations such as the OECD, the World Bank, and the European Union. I accepted this role for two principal reasons. One, a personal one, as having spent many years as executive director of ICSU, I celebrated the merger between the natural and social science organizations, which finally occurred to establish the International Science Council. And I strongly believe that the role of science must be strengthened at the policy level. Nationally, the members of ISC are well placed to do this and can, on the global scale, by bringing together its entire membership, and therefore ISC can provide the service of advising the intergovernmental system. So, having accepted the role, we proceeded to put together a distinguished group of 12 individuals spanning the regions and the experience I believe the ISC needed for this task. You have the list of our steering group members, including two who know ISC well, Peter Gluckman and Pearl Dijkstra, and others with a great deal of expertise in science policy. While some of these did not know ISC well, you now have a new group of well-connected friends. We held 5 virtual meetings, examined ISC strengths and weaknesses, had conversations with ISC members and potential partners or clients from the intergovernmental organizations, and prepared our draft report and recommendations at the end of July. Our plan now is to listen to your feedback and advice and finalize our report by the end of November. We have provided you with 13 ambitious recommendations, all based on the belief that the ISC could and should play a key role in providing the independent and evidence-based scientific advice which the world so badly needs. So if you've had a chance to read our report, you will have seen that our recommendations are divided into 4 clusters. So recommendations 1 to 4 are focused on strengthening ISC's and its members' capacities to provide science policy advice by mapping existing talent, enhancing capacities in communications and partnership building, establish partnerships with like-minded organizations and working with them, and engaging more actively in existing scientific mechanisms in the intergovernmental system. Then recommendations 5 and 6 focus on the fact that, as I think you all know, all intergovernmental organizations depend on their national members. Therefore, connections need to be strengthened between scientists involved in national policy processes and international ones. And national voices could become stronger by coalitions of countries raising their united voices for science. Recommendations 7 to 10 build on the previous ones and are the most ambitious, aimed at positioning ISC as a key scientific partner to intergovernmental organizations. So here we encourage the UN to reestablish a scientific advisory mechanism to the UN General Assembly, which would be even stronger than a short-lived one under the former UN leadership that was not continued. This draft recommendation resonates with the UN Secretary General's recently published report entitled Our Common Agenda, which recognizes the importance of science and proposes to reestablish the Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board. Our steering group further suggested that the ISC offers to be the secretariat for such an advisory board. And as you can imagine, we were very glad to see that the Secretary General either heard our recommendation or had the same very good idea. And in this category, we also suggest that the ISC become a permanent observer to the United Nations and that it establishes a small liaison office in New York. And we encourage continued contacts with a network of influencers, such as many members of my steering group, to become champions or ambassadors for ISC in this scientific advisory role. And then our final recommendations, 11 to 13, encourage ISC and its members to become the champions of science as a global public good by strengthening the public understanding of science, developing regular engagements with both the scientific and mainstream media. And I have to tell you that we were fortunate to have a distinguished journalist from Nature with us at one of our meetings. And finally, by raising the profile of transdisciplinary and outcome-oriented research and ISC's groundbreaking role in this. The steering group acknowledges that the recommendations set out in this document are ambitious and would require significant fundraising and management efforts. Our conversations with ISC members and potential clients pointed to an initial interest in these findings. So now it's over to you. We look forward to hearing the views of the wide community of ISC members present at this General Assembly. And based on your views, we will finalize our report and then support you in any way we can after this. Thank you for your attention.
Julia, thank you for that wonderful introduction and overview of the report. May I also pay you my compliments. You started your work in March and you finalized, or at least you finalized a draft in July. And I know you had to get your steering group together. You needed to talk to members of the ISC, representatives from the ISC, had interviews with experts and put it all together into a succinct set of recommendations. Kudos to you and your team. I would like to emphasize that, as I said, it was a draft. And so members have the opportunity to still respond to the online form, which has a set of questions regarding the draft report. So please do that. The deadline for your responses is the 30th of October. I would also like to mention that a draft resolution has been prepared. We will not be discussing the text of that resolution. That will be discussed in the next session. But that draft resolution has been prepared as a way to confirm the readiness of the membership to strengthen the role of the ISC in the intergovernmental system. The purpose of this session is to gather feedback from members on the ambition of the ISC to provide science advice to the intergovernmental system and on the recommendations of the report. And please also, and I'm speaking to the audience, do not hesitate to post your comments and questions in the chat box or to request to speak in the chat box. Julia, I'm going to start with you. I noticed that a recurring theme in the responses we've received so far is partnering with others in the delivery of science advice. Could you reflect on that, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, first of all, the fact that the ISC is a membership organization, I don't know if you like to refer to yourselves as a big umbrella, but that's really what you are. Clearly partnering within the ISC, and that's not the whole world, but it's pretty big part of it, would make a lot of sense. So it wouldn't just be a small group from the governing body, but it would be a partnership and basically deciding who does what and where. So some of your national members, the academies, work very well at the national level. And then some others are more of a global nature, and whether they're affiliate organizations or not, and we mention a couple of these in our report, you should really partner with them. Nobody can do this alone to address these issues of becoming the principal. Some of the people we talked to didn't like the term go-to, but the principal advisor, and you will become the go-to, I'm sure, but you're not there yet. The principal advisor on science matters. So that's the idea. It cannot be done alone. And ISC itself is a huge partnership organization. So use everybody's talent.
Yeah. And I'm also aware that some of ISC's members already have very clear links with specific bodies at the UN.
Right.
The UN Secretary General in the most recent report suggested reestablishing the Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board. And I know that the ISC has responded to it, but could you fill us in on the details here?
Okay, let me go first to Maria and then to Peter, who will talk about the response. Maria Ivanova is a member of the steering group and was one of several members of the former advisory board. 3 of our steering group members were involved in that advisory board, which was stopped. So Maria, you talk about what happened, and then I'll go to Peter to explain what the ISC has done in response to the Secretary General's report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julia. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today to address the membership of the ISC and to share with you a little bit about the work, because Pearl is absolutely right. Well, the work that Julia led is extraordinary. And it was fantastic to be part of that 12-member group and really produce a report that all of us are proud of. And I'm happy to have been in these 2 mechanisms, in the Scientific Advisory Board to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and in this steering committee. So Secretary General Ban Ki-moon established a scientific advisory board on the recommendation of member states, of UN member states, after Rio +20, after the 2012 Rio +20 conference. And he set it up in the end of 2013. It started in 2014. And it comprised 26 scientists, 13 men and 13 women for the first time ever. It was a 50-50 gender balance from around the world. And the UNESCO served as the secretariat at the time because it was the scientific organization. And so we did work with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, produced a report. I will put in the chat the link to this report, The Future of Scientific Advice in to the United Nations. And unfortunately, at the end of Ban Ki-moon's term, the board neither continued nor was discontinued. And so we continued to communicate with each other, but the Secretary General changed, the Director General of UNESCO also changed, and so the board was not formally continued, but it was also not formally disbanded. And so it was really encouraging to see in the latest report by current Secretary General Antonio Guterres that he has committed to re-establishing the Scientific Advisory Board. And so we discussed actually during the steering group meetings what that scientific board did, how it operated, and what were the difficulties, what were the positive contributions, and how it could be reimagined. So this made it into the report. Indeed, recommendation number 7 here says, advocate for the establishment of a scientific advisory mechanism to the UN General Assembly, which is a little bit different than what was previously in existence, which was to the UN Secretary General. So there is a lot of space here for reimagining scientific advice.
That sounds incredibly exciting. Peter, may I ask you a question? Could you, do you have further thoughts on how this might...
Just to update members that immediately after the Secretary General's report was released, we composed a letter and wrote to the Secretary General. It was delivered by Irina Bukova, the former Secretary General Director of UNESCO, on our behalf. The letter both congratulates the Secretary General for revisiting the issue. It does suggest that it's important to, as Maria's just said, revisit and redesign rather than just re-establish what existed, and it offered the support of the ISC to actually provide the support infrastructure to such a committee. We've not yet had a formal response to the letter other than knowing that it's been received.
Thank you.
It was sent in the middle of the General Assembly week, so you wouldn't expect a response at this stage.
I'm not sure who should answer this question. It might be Maria, it might be Peter, it might be Julia, but I understand that there are questions about permanent observer status. Who would be able to elaborate on this?
So let me do that if I may. Anybody else can add to it, but the IUCN, which was the organization that I directed, was a permanent observer to the United Nations. And the idea to the United Nations General Assembly. And you have to apply for that position. And normally you should be an intergovernmental organization, which IUCN wasn't quite, although we had governments who are members. But I think the ISC would probably be considered anyway. And the idea is that you have a permanent seat at the General Assembly. As you probably know, members, I'm not sure how that's decided. It's not always the Austria and Australia and so on that are at the front, but sometimes they're in the middle, so the alphabetical order changes around. The permanent observers always have the same seat, and they have the right to speak immediately after governments and to the General Assembly. And so, frankly, and when I represented the conservation community, we were the only voice for conservation. There is really no voice for science. And a number of our government members would come by my seat and say, look, I only have 5 minutes. Could you make sure you have this message in yours? And of course I did. So I think it's a very prestigious, it's a strong recommendation from us. I think ISC could try. There is a requirement, I believe it's still the same, that you should also have a desk or a little office in New York. We had an office in the offices of one of our members, so it's not an expensive thing. But it's true that a lot of things do happen in New York. I'd be interested to see what Maria thinks about that. But so that's the idea of the permanent observer mission, especially if you do become the principal science advisor or the secretariat for this advisory mechanism that the Secretary General is suggesting. I still think it would be a good idea. Maria, maybe you want to say something about New York?
Absolutely. Peter wants to say something.
Yes, Peter, sorry.
Well, I just want to say that a similar analogy extends to other UN agencies like WHO, UNEP, and so forth. And I think it's although they use different nomenclature,
yes.
I think we need to become a registered body or whatever is their equivalent nomenclature with all the major UN bodies. And I think that's an agenda item for the coming 12 months.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and others will be harder. But for instance, we don't have a seat at the World Health Assembly, and yet this year they're discussing things very relevant to what the ISC has been working on.
And the new president of the ISC is a doctor, so.
It's wonderful to be the chair of this session because I can see people want to jump in. Maria, I think you had some thoughts also on having that seat in New York.
Yes, it is critical to have that space in New York. As Julia said, you have a formal authority. You become in authority officially because you have that designation as a permanent observer. And so, yes, governments come to you and say, can you support a certain agenda? But you are also an authority, which means you have the reputation, you have the gravitas, and ISC does. And this is indeed what the final aim is, the go-to organization or indeed the authority on science. And so having a formal seat in New York is not only having the formal speaking agenda, but it's also being available in the corridors, for lunch and for coffee, and having the discussions. And that vibrancy of informal diplomacy is absolutely critical. And that's how things happen in New York. And so being present, being able to be both in authority and the authority on science will be critical.
Julia, following up on Maria's comments, in your video, you said, and we all know you used to be the director of ICSU, one of the previous organizations that became the ISC, and that you're also very happy to see the social sciences and the natural sciences and the life sciences now collaborating. But before you embarked on this mission, or at least working on this group, and now, what insights have you gained about the ISC?
Well, I mean, I totally celebrated the merger. I was there. I totally celebrated it. I think I've had a very privileged career. I feel like I sort of grew up at ICSU, and I managed to convince the ICSU members about a lot of things that they hadn't thought about before, including the working on the environment. The Global Change Program started when I was there, and so much more work with UNEP and so on. But I couldn't convince them yet to. And I don't know what happened at ISC. Maybe the same frustration that to have the merger. So I think, I think now, look, you're only a few years old, and not everybody knows about you. I did say in my in my introduction that you've got 12 new friends. Some of the members of my committee didn't know about ISC, but these are all influential people, and you want to increase that group of friends. They don't have to be ambassadors or they don't have to have a title, but you want to increase that. So I feel very, very, very good about the ISC, and I don't mind saying that I didn't succeed. I succeeded on a lot of things, but not this. Pearl, there is a very good, if I may, a good question in the chat from Richard Catlow from the Royal Society. May I address that?
Of course you may address it. I like the way that you're taking a co-lead in this. Please do.
Well, but Richard asked, and this was also, I saw that this morning too, about some people ask, well, we talk a lot about what the ISC can supply, but we don't say enough about whether there is going to be a demand. And you're absolutely right. And thanks, Pearl, for reminding people that we started in March without a committee, and we got all these busy people so we didn't have so much time, only 5 months. And I'm so proud that we were able to do as much. We had a couple of interviews, as you could see in my report, Richard, with what we called clients, to see whether there was an interest in what could be offered by the ISC. But this is not at all a wide survey. But the first reactions were, yes, this could be very interesting. Let's talk some more. So, and you see that in the annex of my report. So it's a great question. And if ISC were to continue, and we will certainly have one more meeting and prepare a final report based on these discussions, I think I would certainly put more emphasis on looking at the demand side and the interest.
I assume Richard Catlow likes that response. May I take this moment to draw your attention to a poll we would like to have. That would be in the for those attending the General Assembly. And the question would be, does the membership support the ambition of the ISC to position itself as the major mechanism for providing scientific advice to the intergovernmental system? The poll will be opening any minute, and feel free to respond. I would like to continue with some of the questions that we received with respect to the online form. And one of it was from the Global Young Academy, and the question was posted by Jennifer Plow. And she, of course, as the coming generation, I mean, these are proper young scientists, but would like to focus on capacity building efforts. And I know that one of the recommendations is about capacity building efforts, but perhaps Julia, you could expand on the ideas behind this recommendation.
Thank you. So I think the whole challenge is for the scientific community to learn how to speak with people from different backgrounds, the so-called policymakers or the decision makers. And so building capacity in that and understanding the intergovernmental system. Note, please, that we focus not only on the UN, as I said in my introduction, but a larger intergovernmental system. And those people who participate in those fora are different from the people who are members of the ISC. So we need to build those bridges and to be able to speak in a way that the others will, those who need the information about science will feel comfortable about and will understand. Maria, do you want to add something? You're a specialist in this, but I feel very strongly about this.
Please go ahead, Maria.
Thank you. Indeed, during our discussions in the steering group, the issue of capacity came up time and again because we had various members. We have ministers, former ministers, current ambassadors, people who have worked not only as representatives of governments in developing countries, but also those of us whose research is in those geographies on those issues. And we see the issue of capacity coming up again and again. But what do we mean by capacity? It's in every UN discussion. It's in every UN. We will do if we had the capacity, and the capacity is not only the funding, it is the understanding of the science. It is in the institutions. It is in the ability to stand up in the UN, in the intergovernmental fora and say, I know what you're talking about, and here is how we have done this in our country or in the geographies that I work with. And we think that the International Science Council, indeed, with its vibrant membership, can provide that capacity. And indeed, the young scientists are the key to linking what has come before them. Now I can't put myself in that category any longer, but I used to be. And actually link the generations of scientific knowledge to the geographies, to the institutions that need that. And so one issue where we need to focus on is understanding how implementation works, the implementation of these commitments that we have in the intergovernmental system. And there's a lot of space there. And that's where the ISC is a perfect platform of combining natural science and social science. So there's a lot of space, and the Global Young Academy will be a critical actor.
Yeah.
I saw you, Maria, as you were saying implementing, I saw Peter Gluckman go. He was nodding his head. Yeah. So, Peter, may I invite you to tell us why you were nodding your head? You're muted.
I'd just like to add to that capacity building is at two levels. One is, as Maria said, and she's hinted at both. There's both the skills of the individuals who are involved in it, and there's also the development of the institutions that are needed to broker the interface. And I think ISC, I noticed in the chat a question from Jörg. Yeah. I think the key role of the ISC in that sense is as a broker. We can be the broker between the multilateral system and the science system. We cannot pretend to be the experts on everything. Right. And therefore, we need to understand our role as a broker. I would highlight ISC's daughter child, INGSA, International Network of Government Science Advice, which has trained directly now more than 2,000 individuals in over 100 countries in the skills of brokerage, and indirectly, because of its training programs, which are further developed, many more, and is now focused more on, as well, on institutional side. And I've suggested to the president of INGSA that they should offer their services to the other members of the ISC family to help develop the skills across all the membership.
The offer has been duly noted. Thank you, Peter. Julia, I would like to return to you. And this is in response to one of the comments made by Karina Bethany of Glasgow. That's the Latin American Social Science Council. And she refers to, one, making the perspective of the global south visible. But she also talks about interdisciplinarity, so making the inputs from the broad ranges of science visible. But to complicate it further, she also uses that word transversality, which I understand as always involving citizens or NGOs in co-creating the questions that should be addressed. Can you elaborate on the role of ISC in, and it might have to do also with what I like is the go-to, but you say the primary entry point, but it's also taking into consideration the many roots of a scientific problem and the necessity to use various insights in addressing them and then transforming it into scientific advice.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a great question. I know that the organization in Latin America, and I have a lot of respect for it. I think one of our recommendations specifically, that's actually the last one, recommendation 13. Some cultures say that's bad luck number. I think it's a good luck number in the sense that I think this is one of the most important recommendations, and that is that the ISC should really raise the recognition and the profile of what we called in this transdisciplinary science. We decided not to call it interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary. And then our footnote on that page gives a definition, the definition that we agreed on, but there are probably others of what that means. It means it both integrates academic researchers from different and often unrelated disciplines and non-academic sectors. So that's the non-academic, it's the intergovernmental system to reach a common goal. And I think this is something where the ISC, once it is universally known and respected, it will be going with this expertise to be transdisciplinary. And I must say that I also mean by that is that the transdisciplinarity cannot come from one part of the world, neither the global south, nor the global north, nor the global east or west, and nor can it come only from one or two genders. So this, I think, is something which I would really put in your community. I keep saying our because my heart is somewhat with your communications. And as I think my entire steering group feels so attached now to the ISC, we consider ourselves as your ambassadors with a small a. So we will certainly tell the world about this important organization that crosses boundaries between disciplines and cultures and regions.
In taking notes in response to your video, I had made a note, group of well-connected friends. So I'm very happy that you bring forward that point. In the chat, I see a question from Martin Visbeck, and he asks, what are the opportunities to support ISC members to learn more about how to engage with the UN system by providing formats like workshops and meet the expert sessions in preparation for significant UN discussions? And he continues, as well as how to engage and make their voice and perspectives heard. You can take that question, Julia?
I'll start and Maria can add to it. We've worked together on many things, Maria and I, so we speak this, we help each other. So first of all, one of our recommendations was to start out by mapping the talents throughout your huge organization. Who knows what to do well and who has contacts where, to add to that group of influential friends. And then, of course, really a leitmotif throughout is this building the capacity. I think that will be so important. Who knows where is the capacity and how can we build it? How can we cross the bridges? I think that's a very important point. Maria, pick up from there.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Martin, for that question, because it actually does go to the core of the recommendation of having that UN presence. And to be a permanent observer, to be the organization that supports a steady and permanent space for scientific advice in the UN system. When that is there, your question of what are the mechanisms for that to then transcend to the and to get into the membership, there will be very, very clear opportunities. Right now, I don't know what is available at the ISC. As Julia said, several of us joined, but we're not as familiar with the ISC. But we have certainly made the point that this is indeed what the ISC should be doing and what it needs its own capacity to be lifted, right? And this is where the group of friends, of supporters, of ambassadors with the small a comes in. There are many of us who work in with the UN system, in the UN system, and would be available for these Meet the Expert session and various training opportunities. But we also need to emphasize that co-creation element, because this is what transdisciplinarity really means. Not for scientists to say, oh, here are some answers, let's find your questions, but for us as scientists to go and figure out what are the questions in the intergovernmental system and then set up the mechanisms that actually generate answers through the community of members.
Thank you. I see in the chat a comment by Samuel. And to be honest, I don't know what CEFA data is. Please forgive me for not knowing. But this person refers to the standards that are developed of the FAO and WHO Food Standards Program. And these are, it's called Codex Alimentarius. Alimentarius, of course, the Food Commission. And these standards are developed in 6 UN official languages. Are you familiar with these standards? I think Julia's nodding, you are nodding, Maria. Who would like to take this question?
So I'd like to say 2 things and then Peter, but one is, first of all, Samuel, one of the problems, and this is not really intended to embarrass you, I think all of us have this problem. One of the problems with the scientific community is that we use all these acronyms and we just assume, so you'll have to tell us what CEFA and DEDA stands for. But I'm guilty of this too. We really need to be very clear in who we are and what we, and of course, I think most of us know WHO and FAO, but even that. So I do know that commission, and it would, there are other such instruments throughout the UN system that will help the ISC put together the best way to provide advice. Again, coming back to transdisciplinarity, however, that there's very little link between the different areas that are interested in the future of our humanity's well-being and the planet's well-being, and the whole area of food systems, and I'm quite involved in some of that right now, and one of my positions is pretty much separated from the health issues. I'm glad to see that this one, there is collaboration here, but mostly not. Conservation issues, totally separated. So one thing that the ISC can offer as this transdisciplinary organization is to cross those bridges, learning from these kinds of things, but making sure that they're followed up elsewhere.
Thank you. Peter, I think you also wanted to elaborate, and then I would like to give Jinghai.
I'd just like to build on what Julia's just said, to point out there's a difference between technical inputs, which many of the technical agencies of the UN do very well, and the Codex Alimentarius is a technical agency working on food standards and food additives, which I've worked with quite a lot. As opposed to the policy agencies, which are where the issues that we're really struggling with often in the set of global challenges lie. And I think that we need to be careful not to pretend to critique what are very good technical agencies across the whole of the UN system, for instance, in the ITU, in the patent area and so forth. It's in the policy area that the issues lie. And that's where I think we can do a lot. Just to go back one point, I'm going to take a proposal to an early meeting of the board on a number of the issues around how we might build capacity for our members in these various areas we've been talking about.
Thank you, Peter. Jinghai, thank you for joining us. Jinghai,
thank you.
governing board member.
Thank you.
Please take the screen.
Okay, I just would like to back to the discussion of the transdisciplinarity. You know, I believe transdisciplinarity is really important for the science in the future. And it is also very important for the global challenges, different challenges. So that means I would like to say we are at a high time. We face global challenges with the paradigm shift in science featured with the transdisciplinarity. And vice versa, transdisciplinary, when we shift the paradigm in science, we have to change our approach for the global challenges. So these global challenges and transdisciplinarity should be promoted jointly. So this, I believe, is very, very important, but not so much attention to paid. So I would like to emphasize International Science Council. We have we have capacities to do these two issues jointly. So that's my comments.
Thank you very much, Jinghai, bringing forward a crucial point. We're dealing with complex issues, and they require a transdisciplinary approach. Julia has her finger up. Please, Julia.
I just want to apologize to Samuel because apparently Safa Dede is his last name, so I apologize. You know, since it was in capital letters, I immediately thought of an acronym. I still think my point about acronyms is correct, but not in the case of Samuel, so apologies.
Apologies well accepted. I see that the results from the poll have come in. And a large majority is supportive of the ambition of the ISC to position itself as the major mechanism for providing scientific advice to the UN system. Interestingly, 2% do not feel that. And I think even if it's 2%, it should not be ignored. We should see what is behind, why these people behind the 2% are not in agreement. And then there's 9% who are not sure, and I'm sure that will all depend on the final proposal that will be presented to the United Nations. I have to keep an eye on the time, and I would like to invite my speakers, so Maria, Julia, and Peter, for their final words. Please, may I start with Julia?
Thank you very much. Well, I have to say that most presidents in democratically elected countries don't get 89%. Nobody gets 89%. So that's pretty encouraging for you and to continue. And we will certainly help you a little bit and be available to continue to be watchful and good friends and ambassadors with a small a. So that's one thing I want to say. And the other thing is to say that, I think this is a great challenge for the ISC. You've got an awful lot of other things to do, I know, but to be able to become the go-to or the primary mechanism for transdisciplinary scientific advice in a system where science was sort of isolated to separate agencies who don't talk to each other, or in a system which really doesn't take it seriously enough. And part of the blame is on us as scientists. We haven't been able to explain it in a way briefly and simply, in a way where decision makers feel comfortable and know what to do next, what action to take. So 89% for me is not only an encouragement that our steering committee did a good job, but that basically your question to us was the right question at the right time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. Maria.
Thank you. I want to reflect on this issue of global challenges and transdisciplinarity. I sit at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, which is actually the only public research university in Greater Boston. We have 52 colleges and universities in this city, which is the highest concentration of academic institutions in the world. And yet there is only one public research university, which is University of Massachusetts, Boston. And so we sit at that line of where we see what is happening in the world and in our community around our neighborhood, but also globally, and we feel compelled to respond. And I think this is, in a sense, what the International Science Council is now facing. Universities like ours are now forming their strategic plans around grand challenges, which is just another way of saying global challenges. Yeah. What are the grand challenges of the time? And we are reimagining our education system to respond to them with transdisciplinary approaches. And yet there is no international space where that is being done. And I think that the International Science Council provides that space, but also that creativity for reimagining how to link what is happening in the world around us, very locally and also globally, because we all are members of these concentric circles of communities. And I would really encourage all of the members to engage in providing a vision and then implementing it throughout your local networks and globally with the United Nations. I sincerely hope that will be the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for very stimulating words. Peter, we're actually over our time, so be brief, but I invite you also for some final words.
Well, in my other life, I head a transdisciplinary think tank. I have to support what Maria's just said. But I just want to finish by thanking Julia, Maria, but all the other members of a working group, which I think for the ISC, which really worked very enthusiastically, very decisively and very quickly, and has actually produced a very robust report, which we'll be discussing later in a different way under the resolutions later on in the next few minutes. But I just want to thank particularly Julia for her enthusiasm and her chairmanship. It was really a really delightful experience to work with Julia. Thank you.
I would say chairpersonship.
Yes, I was trying to get my
I knew you were
right.
And Anne-Sophie Stevens for being our
absolutely
support and organizer. I've gone 2 minutes past our time. Thank you for what I felt was an energizing session. We talked about what makes the ISC different, what is its role in the advisory system. I think there's a very clearly defined role. And may I thank you for participating. And now it's time for the break, and I'm sure there'll be more wonderful live music. Thank you all very much.